Hey everybody, you are watching Not Safe for Wonks presents Bitch Brunch. It is my Friday special girly girls time and boily boys time and non-binary identities and all of the everybody's time to talk about sex, gender, sexuality, and how those are different things. Today, we have the OG3, me, Rachel Kahn, Brandon Buchanan from Not Safe and everywhere else, and Andrea, our hostess with the maybe not the hostess, as we have never yet determined whether Andrea is in fact a host. And as our special guest today, we have Desireé Stevens. Hi, Desireé.
Hello.
So today we are actually going to talk about something a little bit like maybe unexpected, right?
Controversial.
Controversial, perhaps. We're going to talk about toxic masculinity. Let's go. We toxic. We masculine.
Rachel, honestly, like, no bullshit. I'm not super into the pink background. I'm not super into the teddy bears. Like, when you signed me onto this, I was under the impression that there would be forest fires, and pointless destruction is always cool with me. Two bears hugging, kind of sus. I'm not really sure about it. Yeah, I'm not totally on board. Maybe we could go back to the orange.
No. So, no, we are actually going to talk about toxic masculinity day. We're going to talk about sort of in the broader sense, where toxic masculinity comes from, like what it is, why feminists give a shit about it in the first place, and sort of generally like what men have to gain from feminism gaining traction. And also, some sort of practical strategies for how we might be able to heal some of these rifts, that have created these, frankly, destructive patterns of behavior in certain people.
Rachel, when we started Red Clay like last year, how sometimes you or I would just give some takes? I feel like we're too famous to just spice around the takes like we used to. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It might be an interesting hour with some weird detours.
So we're not going to talk about fucking monkeys anymore.
That's still on the table. Really, everything's on the table.
Yeah.
How big is the table is really the question.
How many monkeys are on it?
It's a 60-hour table, but due to entropy, we're going to be able to reverse the time stream of the table. So there will be a forwards table on Team A and a backwards table. It's a whole mess.
So I think like a good starting point for this is just to sort of define the difference between like masculinity and toxic masculinity, right? Because we sort of in our semantic structure in our culture in the United States, we have these very defined ideas about masculine and feminine identities having like certain personality traits, there's sort of a pressure on women to be, soft and kind and emotionally open and available and, like good with children and stuff like that. And men are sort of expected to be more strong and hairier and, smell like wood smoke or whatever. They'll punch a bear. Like there's all of these sort of associations with masculinity. And a lot of them, in fact, are kind of also associated with violence.
It's kind of interesting that you say that because I think, first of all, what we determine as masculine and feminine, it very much depends on the country that you're in and what the cultural needs of the society are. So when you talk about like masculinity, there's like, you were talking about being hairy and cutting wood. But like, if you were to go to a different part of the country, masculinity would be wearing a 3-piece suit and shades and driving a good car and being in finance.
Yeah.
In a different part of the country, masculinity would be driving a lowrider and having a strap. So it really depends on where you are. And generally, like, I think at the core, we think of masculinity as like contributing to the immediate survival of your group in the most profound way possible. Whatever the hardest task is in making sure that your group survives, generally is like what I think of as like, oh, that's the masculine role. And what that is like changes. And when we talk about like what is toxic masculinity, generally it's somebody acting out that survival role in a situation where it's not actually called for. Like almost everything that we think of as like toxically masculine has like some place in the history of society where it was appropriate to behave in that way. But like in the current day or in the current situation, that is something that a person who has like common sense and context clues and understanding of other people, like that's not the thing that you should be doing right now. That's generally like the frame I think of those things in.
I like that. I find that toxic masculinity is more any aversion to anything feminine. Like, because there's always a time and place for all of those things as far as what you just said. And like you said, in the context of whatever region, whatever subsect, whatever part of the country you're in. But toxic masculinity for me, by definition, is an absolute aversion to anything that's feminine. Because those traits in and of itself are, to me, fine traits. Like, you know, the absolute survival of the group, going to the one with the most masculine energy, absolutely fine by me. But the aversion to being and to finding that balance, I'm more into like the energies of femininity and masculinity, and it doesn't need to be held inside of any particular body. It just they are, those energies are there to balance out. So for me, that's what I wanted to interject, is that toxicity is just the aversion to anything feminine. Like, oh no, we don't hug because that's not manly. Like, that's
it seems like there's also like very interwoven with that vision of masculinity a lot of homophobia, because like that's where you'll see questions like, fellas, is it gay to eat bananas, you know? Or like, fellas, is it gay to have sex that isn't missionary position, right? Or like,
the answer is of course yes.
Yes, everything is gay. You're gay. I'm gay. The whole world is gay. It's awesome.
Gay 2020. Yes.
We're all gay 2020.
Yeah.
But also, you know, there's that sort of aversion, like you were saying, you know, desire to avoid that kind of sort of perceived femininity or homosexuality. And it's interesting to me how much of it really seems to be about mounting. Like, and it's not just in the sexual sense, but in the sort of sense of like dominance, you know, that there is this sort of like central, I guess, sort of phallic imagery to it of like, you know, being on top of the other person, whether that's like metaphorically, you know, within sort of the power structures of your own house, or, you know, your role out in the world to be the provider, you know, while competing with everybody else. Brandon's laughing. I'm curious why.
Listen, buddy, this is a very nice sweater. I spent a lot of dough on it. Don't let the nice sweater fool you, buddy. It's always Twitch wilding out on this chat. But before we get back to your larger point, like of dominance and repression, I think there's also, as we talk about that, there's social signaling too, right? Because in order to have like survival as an individual, there's also the community aspect. So in order to have community survival, there's policing.
Yes.
So there's not only this role of like, I have to survive for my relatives and close, you know, people. There's also the I've got to ensure that my neighborhood is doing what they need to do. So now, and this is where things generally tend to go downhill in terms of like how we interact with others. People take on this role for themselves or their friend groups. Like, I've got to make sure that everybody else around me is doing what I'm doing too. And that is when we're trying to express to the other dudes around us, like, yeah, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and trying to make sure other people are doing that. And how do we do that? Well, I mean, in modern cultures, we do that by setting an example. But in other cultures, we do that just by like roasting other people until they do what they're supposed to do. So that can just be, we're shitting on them, we're pissing on. But to kind of go to loosely tie back into your point, and you can easily like segue from here, dunking, or if we're dunking on someone, is this not a masculine display of dominance in your
I mean, you are in a sense mounting someone when you dunk on them, right? You go above them, you're forcing something through a hole, like you are penetrating something, you are on top of them because you are physically dunking over their heads. Like, is this not mounting?
No.
I mean, when Vince Carter does it, I mean,
I think it depends on what
I will make anything.
Like, it
Cultural
depends on the
language games
style. It depends on the context. You can dunk someone with facts and logic. That doesn't necessarily mean you're asserting dominance.
But
It just means you're
here's the thing:
putting them in their place.
has Ben Shapiro ever truly dunked on anybody?
Well, no, of course, of course.
He can't reach because he can't reach the rim. Speaking of toxic masculinity, anyway.
Yeah. Well, so I think actually bringing up dunking is really, really appropriate, and bringing up policing is really, really appropriate, because so much of masculinity is policed with, shame and violence. You think about like little boys getting told like, don't do that because that's gay, and you'll get your ass beat. Like,
oh,
you will get your ass beat. To be fair.
Yeah, and you will. Like,
especially depending on when you were raised, depending on what. Like, I'm 30. I'm in my early to mid 30s. Like, there was a time where you would. There were a few people in my high school who were just out and with it, but there was definitely a lot of social, this and that.
Yeah.
There's like that kind of gray area between like people that are out and proud of doing the things that they do, and like that's kind of like somewhat respected, and then there's that like gray area of people that aren't like, they're just kind of like default, I guess. And if they lean in a direction that people feel like they shouldn't, then there's that kind of like, oh, you can't quit the team vibe,
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I'm from Atlanta, and definitely like the people who were like out and flaming, if that's an okay word to use, were like mocked a little, but like they were not like harassed. They were not like harassed physically. It was really the people who were like, we got to have a problematic language. I'm speaking as a hood historian, so I might have to use antiquated language. But the dudes who were sweet in high school, they were getting roasted a lot more than the people who were just out with it, just because they were maybe in more proximity. There was more room to police their behavior than the person that was just like, I'm really out of the picture. I'm not a gettable get in terms of enforcing behavior on that person.
Right. Well, if you completely reject somebody's expectations of you, then it doesn't matter if they're trying to enforce it, because they don't have that kind of power over you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
I
think
to
we see it in kids.
Though.
Oh, they will. Yeah, of course. As we have seen many times. But I don't know. I think, even then we talk about like kids reinforcing it, the world reinforcing it, whether flaming is okay to say. To be clear, if you want something that's flaming and gay, might I suggest the movie Promare, which is extremely gay and literally about sentient fire. It's great.
For the next hour, I will be speaking just as a ghetto historian.
Okay.
If I'm sharing my memories, I'm just sharing what's been shared with me, so everybody knows what's up. So that's the disclaimer.
Yeah, we are assuming good faith. If we do something that triggers somebody, like, genuinely let us know. We're not going to be like dickheads about it.
Right.
Like, we're not trying to hurt anybody, and we appreciate feedback. These are all true. The one thing that we have going that everybody knows is, wait for it,
we're not
the Men Don't Say Bitch challenge. That's the one thing that's constant. Men don't say bitch. Other than that,
I have that as a courtesy to you on a personal level, but like if we're out talking with other people, I don't enforce that challenge on other people. Let's be clear.
Yeah, me either.
I can't. I'm not a cop, but it's nice.
I usually just respond with Men Don't Say Bitch challenge. And like, that's it. That's like the full extent of my engagement with it. And we'll circle back to bitch and why like this show in particular is named Bitch.
I hope that for the next 45 minutes I can describe the name of the show.
You can say you can
it must be followed by the word brunch. It's like the hard R. Like you can, but anyway.
It's like, okay, so you can say it with brunch after, as long as there is like an implied soft B, No, I'm kidding. I don't care if you say the name of the show. Like, I'm not that controlling about it. It's fine. Just don't call women bitch. Don't call people bitch, right? Taking that step back, right?
What if it's Ben Shapiro and I have the rock gif and he says "shut up, bitch" and everybody cheers?
What?
Wait, have you ever seen that gif?
No. What is this?
There's a gif of The Rock, who, as we all know, is the people's champion.
Like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
He's going to be president in 2028.
My husband, yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a popular Twitter gif video where he just says, shut up, bitch, and everybody screams. They're like, yes, this is great. And it's just typically used on Twitter. It's just like, that's bad.
I'm going to find this gift now because I want to use it.
I'm starting whole discourses on this. Let's come back to that later.
You know what? I think we can kind of work it in now, actually, because I think if there are some ways to bring up these power dynamics and sort of circle it back to the core thesis of the first part of the show, which is, how does toxic masculinity present itself and how is it made?
Sure.
I think there's a good example, right? Because the meaning of bitch is different depending on which gender you are calling a bitch, right? But it's the same pejorative sense. Women bitches are bitches because we are assertive and we have high expectations and we have, firm and unapologetic boundaries that are not necessarily where like normal female boundaries are expected to be, right? Like men don't say bitch challenge. And when you talk about a man who's a bitch, he's weak, he's cowardly, he's, sissified, right? He has become feminine. And so when you use bitch towards a woman, it's like you are too masculine. And when you use it towards a man, it's you are too feminine. But all of it ties intrinsically into this sort of like gendered expectation about power and assertiveness and like hierarchy, where you are supposed to sit in sort of the hierarchy of gendered power. And I think that's important. I think that's why, I say men shouldn't say it. That's why, I draw analogies to like other slurs and how like, a slur like bitch ultimately is still a slur. Obviously it's not the N-word. I won't say the N-word here right now. We know which one is like a heavier word, right? But it has these like commonalities in the way the power dynamics are shaped at a lesser scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, what I think is like with those kinds of words, with slurs, they belong to the people that they've been wielded against. So like if you are a woman, if you present as a woman, if people call you a bitch on a regular basis, like as a woman, I think that's like totally fair to use that word, like, and own it and reclaim that, When men use it against other men, it is still ultimately attacking women, right? Because it's still saying women are less than and you are less than because you are similar to one. Does that make sense?
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So where are you at on women calling women, and women by all means, like you said, like women with the X, calling, like if I'm like, oh, you're a bitch, Rachel, like.
That's fine. That's your word.
But even if I'm meaning it in like some derogatory type of way, so that's okay for you?
I mean, like, okay, so is it okay to say like mean things to people? I don't know. Sometimes, like,
no, I mean,
but in the sense, like, is bitch between two women uniquely privileged and like okay with me? No, it is specifically about the power dynamic of when men use it that bothers me, because it is describing a power dynamic in which men have an unfair advantage.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I got that.
Yeah, and that is why. But I also, like, I understand there are cultural differences, right? Like, I know in the UK, they just say cunt for, like, no reason, and it's, like, an affectionate term. And that's fine. If you're from the UK and that's what it means there, that's fine. Like, I understand that there's a massive diversity of culture and linguistic, like, intent and meaning, and I'm always here for good faith conversation, like, regardless of where you're from or what language you're using. And also in this space of bitch brunch, men don't say bitch challenge.
So, where does son of a bitch land? Where is this on the spectrum? Is this better, worse? Because technically that's insulting someone's mother.
Yeah.
When you really think about it.
I feel like insulting somebody's ancestors is gender non-specific. But you are still calling their mom a bitch, and it is still about the mom being feminine wrong.
Totally about the mom.
Yeah. So I don't know. Although I think probably son of a bitch was intended to literally be a dog, It's my guess. Yeah. Like you were literally a dog of a human, in which case you could just call them a dog.
Ooh, so is calling someone a dog worse or better than a bitch?
Better. In fact,
I think better.
I like that better. I mean, like it's like saying somebody's trash.
I like dogs.
I prefer that. I use that. I'm like, you're trash.
I prefer to keep the sanctity of dogs alive, personally.
Right. Yeah, that's why I say you're trash.
That's true. Dogs are very good. They're very pure. Also, I will say, if we are on Facebook, we should be careful not to say the bad phrase that is the men are Facebook and Facebook is trash and y'all can work out the transitive property. We should probably not say that so that we don't get kicked off.
Correct.
Because
Wait, what's
Facebook
that?
is fascist as fuck.
You can
If you say on Facebook the phrase "men are T-word," they will ban you like instantly. Like the algorithm just catches it. They just like.
You cannot say that men are trans.
I
did not know that. That's amazing.
It's incredibly bad. Yeah. And so what I've started doing is I've started saying men are Facebook because they're never going to ban me for saying Facebook. Because they would have to acknowledge in order to do that Facebook is fucking trash.
Even if you give them the code, they can't do it. They've got the cipher, but they can't utilize it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rachel, have you ever called someone a virgin or implied that they have a small dick? And if so, does that reinforce toxic hierarchies of sexuality?
So I'm going to answer your question, and I'm going to actually tie it around to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is exactly that. Yeah, I have done these things. I try not to anymore.
Why?
I think, because I think ultimately body shaming is not great. Like, regardless, like if you got a small dick, you got a small dick, right? I think small penis energy is maybe something different, and we can have a conversation about that too. But like, just generally being like, haha, you got a baby dick. It's like, I don't know. Like, so, like.
I don't want to get too larger discussion.
Shit in your pants, like.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I want to.
Calling people virgin, I think, is fine though, because like if you're unfuckable because you're a little nightmare of a goblin and you hate women, like you deserve to be a virgin. And
goblin
calling you one in that case is not only appropriate but like morally necessary.
Yeah, I think in that perspective, it's equivalent to. Well, I don't know. And again, I am being the guy that's derailing the conversation. So everybody throw tomatoes at me if I say this. But like, is it equivalent to calling someone like a loser or having no friends?
I think so.
So is that okay?
Well, I think we should contextually bring this back to a pandemic. People probably shouldn't be attempting to lose their virginity during this time of crisis. So
when you think about it,
I think
real
virgin
sacrifice
should
you're
be
making
twisted into a positive at this point. You know,
we're all just going to become trad now that the apocalypse is upon us.
If someone calls you a virgin during this time of crisis, you look right into the camera. You say, "Actually, I am a COVID ball cell. I'm keeping it tight till this virus is over, and then after the virus, we'll see where we're at."
There we go. Okay. Look at you fixing it all up.
We got it. We got it together. The thing I wanted to bring it back to, right? Have I ever said things to challenge a man's masculinity to insult him? Yes, I have in the past. And I think this is a really great segue to talk about the ways that women in particular are reinforcing this.
Yes, Jesus.
You know?
Oh, I'm sorry. Probably a preacher.
Yes. Well, and this is the one that doesn't get talked about a lot, right? And there's a reason why, right? Because having this conversation in a room with men, I'm not going to do that. Like I will have Brandon on, who I specifically invited to be on this pod because I know and trust Brandon specifically. But like, would I lead this conversation with more than like 2 white dudes in the room? No, never, ever. Because it gets exhausting, right? And because I think there's a lot of people who want to absolve themselves of accountability by like 2 coking women, right? 2 cucking women, haha. And I mean, I think that, you know, that can make it really hard to have an authentic, meaningful conversation about it. But we don't have those dynamics here. So I wanted to hand it over to you, Des, because we talked about this a couple days ago, and you had some really, really insightful points on it about like how women need to also take responsibility for this.
Absolutely. So I have like I am not, the feminist scholar that some are, and I give much credit to my daughter who kind of like walked me through all of those things. And I come from a background of definitely having gender roles and those kind of places. I too am a hood historian. But I think that there's been a lot of, I think boys have been boys and men. And again, back to like whatever language that may be harmful. That's not my intent, but just speaking in the language of things that people would understand of these just 2 binaries. I think that boys have been completely left out of feminism to the point where we've excelled our girls forward to the front of the line and left them out, and they have no idea what the hell happened and how to act. And then by doing so, we reinforce that, like you mentioned earlier, with saying, you know, oh, I'm gonna beat your ass if you do this. No, you can't do that. And like we wind up creating these little subsets with boys that they're only allowed to fuck or fight. That's like my famous thing I say with boys. And all of the things that we then have problems with is what we as women cultivated, because up until very recent history, we are the nurturers. We are the people who are raising these children. And because we stuck to those binaries, because we as the moms, the women of the society, we either went along complicit as fuck, or we actually enforced all of those binaries there. And now we are reaping, you know, like the chickens are coming home to roost. We created that. I can't get mad at like the 40-year-old dude that I'm dating, knowing that, like, you know, somebody, like, we did that. We raised that. Women made that. Like the shit you're dating, I tell women this all the time. The men that you complain about right now are the men that you raised.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's something in there about taking responsibility for our predecessors. And there's a really important sort of lesson in that, both for men, for women, and for everybody who has, you know, left the gender binary altogether. I think really understanding, you know, how people got to where they are and where they are to begin with, right? And I know I had a very, very angry feminist stage where I was like ready to go off on like any man who spoke to me. I had like an entire blog of me just waiting for a dude to fuck up so I could be mean to him for clout.
Isn't that like, your current Twitter?
No, actually. My current Twitter is literally only the egregious cases. Trust me when I say I used to be worse. Mine now is funny. Yeah, because what I do is I send their dick pics back to their wives. And that's a great move.
That's such a good strat.
Actually, my all-time favorite, this is a fun diversion and worth telling, even though it's a total diversion. My all-time favorite is one time I sent the screenshots back to the dude's wife, and then the wife started hitting on me. And I was like, should I fuck this guy's wife to get back at him?
The answer is yes.
The answer is always yes.
I still regret not doing it. If I'm being honest, I regret not doing it. But like, they had a baby. I wasn't trying to wreck their marriage. Like, and I feel like, let them work it out, you know?
Rachel, you're in the content game. So I demand that whenever you tell this story from now on, you did it. I want you to just come up with some fan fiction about you wrecking.
All right. I fucked his very hot wife. It's fine.
That's right.
I have had sex with a lot of attractive women, so it's totally fine to just say that this one happened as well.
Okay.
There you go. Add it. Slide it on in.
It is now canonized into the lore.
Right. So, all of that being said, what was I even talking about? How did we get here?
Well, we're basically talking about women's role.
Women creating.
Yes. Okay, so I'm back on track. Thank you. What we also need to do as women is recognize where the men, our peers as men, are. You know, and like you were saying, Des, we have to recognize that these are people who were raised as boys in the 90s. You know, and we need to sort of understand the pressures that were on them at that point. You know, and I think that a lot of millennial-aged men are in some ways having kind of a crisis of masculinity because they have been hammered with these ideas of what toxic masculinity is. And they have a decent sense, a lot of them do anyway, of like these behaviors that people have said, like, stop doing this. But what we have not done is we have not like actually taken the time to help them figure out who they are in absence of that. Right. You know, and we haven't been willing to really help them. And the reality is, if we were raised... Yeah,
women if we were raised had a space to do that, to do what we're doing right now. You know, like cocktail hours, bitch brunches. This is not a new thing. Women have always had safe spaces, even when you were like just shunned to the kitchen. It was always, you know, bunch of other women in the kitchen talking shit, you know? So like we've always had that. And men have like, you know, they've never had that space to just and like literally just exhale. It's gotta be like, yeah, bro. It's like this super hyped up shit. Like even if they're like, you know, I have a great men friends. So even if they like, I am trusted with like more sensitive emotions of them. But even then, it's still so close to the vest. It literally makes me sad. Like I'm like, God, like how fucking long have you guys been holding on to this generational trauma? Because that's what that is. That's like genetic coding into just being able to, and we do it with the language always.
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
day.
Women have, or part of growing up as a girl, right? That can be, and I use this in the sense of like, I didn't really properly grow up as a girl, but I grew up in the negative space that was shaped like a woman, right? And society taught me woman lessons, right? And as part of that, there was a lot more focus on like talking about things and like expressing feelings and being there for our friends and like our storytelling and like our cartoons and like our toys and the things that we give to little, you know, assigned female at birth girls to teach them how to girl, right? Because we are teaching people how to girl and how to boy. And those are massive parts of our cultural messaging. And none of this is to say, of course, that gender is like biologically essential or that it's like a single binary, because we know these things are not true. But when we talk about the way our society, you know, circa 1995 was conceiving of gender, there were like two of them, you know? And when we engage with men now, it can be kind of frustrating, for me at least, to have to do sort of like double work emotionally to like make it comfortable for them to talk about these things. And I don't always like it. Sometimes I resent it. But I do think that like if none of us are willing to have these conversations, they're not going to get solved. We can't get through this by like segregating genders, you know?
Right, because then it's just easier for them to say, because it's not like you kind of get used to your own pain, so you're just like, you know what, fuck it. It's just not that important, because, you know, and then especially like we were saying on the phone, is especially when you have men and people that are in that provider role, like most don't have the time. Like the shit that women were able to do to propel to the front of the lines of like emotional capability and emotional intelligence and all of that is because they had time. Like, you know, like you were at home, you were raising children, and like, look, I got 4 kids, so anybody could spare me with the, you know, I know that it's a real job and I'm home with my kids. So I'm like, but you had time. You had this moment of, you know, Maslow's hierarchies of needs. Your provider is providing that very basic physiological needs. So you can elevate to those next levels. And even if it's just a moment every so often or an hour with your girlfriends, you were still able to kind of like go back and forth with conversation and grow and elevate and move up those hierarchies where they're just like, you know, still cavemen, like, I'm gonna go hunt this shit, I'm gonna bring it back. Hunt this shit, bring it back, get some ass. Hunt this shit, bring it back, get some ass. They don't
and so
have
to be clear, you're describing like the shape that people are trying to get forced into. Yeah,
like, you know, like, and that's like kind of just what they've just always really been able to do, or what's expected. Like you said, when you teach boys had a boy and girls had a girl, when we dealing with for so very long just these two genders, these two binaries out within this culture. I can't speak to any other. So like, you know, you have that, and so women have had a lot more space and freedom, and that's not to negate any of the other oppression that comes with that too, but much more space and freedom to grow in those spaces of like, let's talk, let's think. Where we sent boys off to just like go to war, go to work, bring home a check. And that was their value. And if that value was not held up, they were less than men. So we created a lot of the toxicity, and now we're not trying to dismantle it in any kind of way. And that's for me where it becomes like unfair. Like we got to find some type of a balance. Yes, Brandon.
No, I wasn't interrupting you. I was just going to let you finish your point and then chime in afterwards.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in there. So like we have to find that like kind of like a balance where like, you know, I have a son now. Like I get weird with those. I have a child who has a penis and is comfortable with being a boy at this moment. He's 4. We're riding with it. If it changes, that changes. But I make sure that those things are balanced in our house. You know, like if he cries, it's okay. We don't stop that. Like, oh no, you're not angry. You're disappointed. You're sad. I give him more words, you know, more feelings, you know, when the kids are cleaning, you know, I have a 8-year-old and he's 4, you know, why are you sitting there and she's just doing it? I need you to help your sister, you know, just like much more egalitarian in our household, just so it doesn't leave any of them out. And like it creates more balance. But then when we're talking about the men behind that, before guy, you know, like
the men who currently are men.
Right. And the men like my husband, you know, like there's a lot of like breakthroughs that we've had, and I'm super thankful. And like how we discussed on the phone, it's given him a lot of freedom too within his own masculinity, you know, and he's definitely like the typical, like I'll walk through an alley blindfolded backwards with him and with no question be concerned at all. And that's a level of masculinity I require in my life to feel comfortable. Everybody has their own.
Right. To like feel safe.
Yes.
Right.
Safety is my main importance of as masculinity, and he provides that without a question. He's going to die for me without no doubt.
We'll circle back to that because that's an interesting point, but I wanted to give Brandon a chance to weigh in.
Andrea, actually, I wanted to kick it to you first. If you want to weigh in on any of this.
You have been quiet.
Because you have not.
I'm just listening. I've got a point, but one of my points that I would like to bring up is that there's just like we're in this kind of transitionary period. You know, we're like, there's a lot of young men and boys and teenagers and stuff that kind of like are in this era where they're kind of learning and they maybe have more space for this, but they can see like an older brother or a father figure or something like even Donald Trump on television. And they've got this idea that it's like, if only I were born 15 years ago, I could get away with some things. And there's this kind of like counter, like, culture kind of brewing where you have these people that like are now getting that space to maybe kind of fully realize their emotional value and like how they don't have to adhere to certain things. But for them, that's like they notice a loss of power. They notice that there's like, you know, if I act a certain way, I can assert more dominance, I can have more power, I can have more control. And they resent the fact that society is going down a certain road, and they will try to like steer it off course or try to go the opposite way at any time. And that's how we get these like, you know, like when it comes to like mass shooters that are like teenagers, and like how it comes to like school fights and stuff, you get this like expression of like, I want to go back to the old days. I don't know what the old days were because it's been mythologized to them. Like they've only seen like, oh wow, this is like it could have been cooler for me if I were born 15 years ago. And that's something also that we have to kind of build an alternative answer to. Right. That I don't know what the answer is.
That's actually incredible. That's an incredible point because I got in here and I was thinking that my role on the show would be I would put my hands up and we go, not all men are bad, and y'all would all throw tomatoes at me. But actually, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. It would have been better for a lot of these guys to be born 20 years ago. As there are economic advancements, as there's more equity, as women have more education, like there's more of a level playing field in terms of economics, in terms of economic opportunity, in terms of life opportunity. And whether that's racial equity, whether it's gender equity, whether it's class equity, that system, like as you approach meritocracy, is going to filter out people who would have done well just being themselves and being born like 30 years ago. And it's a normal political reaction for them to want to go back because they, as a matter of fact, would have been better off in a system with less equity. And the answer to that isn't for women to make space for guys to work out what their identity should be. I don't think it's the responsibility of women as a gender at all to help define masculinity or ensure that guys feel safe in their role in society. Like that's a conversation that like men need to have amongst themselves. And hopefully women, like as they watch that conversation, the result of that conversation isn't one that's like a gross or violent result of that conversation. But people, like if you're a guy in this society, you are going to be on a more level playing field. And that means you, as we are in this transition period that Andrea talked about, you're going to need to study harder than you would have had to study 40 years ago. You're going to have to work harder on social relations. You're going to have to wash your ass. Like there's a lot of shit that you're going to have to do now.
Yeah, that doesn't say that that's so real.
You're going to have to learn social skills. You're going to have to do a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have had to do years ago. And a lot of guys have just opted out of that altogether and say, man, if I've got to wash my ass, then forget human contact at all. Like I'm
humans generally.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
Here's Here's one concern I have about the men teaching men model. I agree, men need to teach men. And I agree that men need to figure out with each other how to create like this new masculinity that will incorporate, the best parts of masculinity and that will heal some of the, damages of toxic masculinity. But also, women and men do need to be in communication about this, because even the best men, and I say this like with genuine love in my heart, there are men in my life who I love very dearly and trust more than just about anybody. And even those men are not 100% safely never going to be sexist. And it's not a matter of, intent. It's not a matter of bigotry. It's not a matter of like misogyny even. It's a matter of privilege, right? There are conversations that men won't know to have without women communicating things to them that men have not yet like had a chance to hear, And so we need to at least be having conversations with some men, who can then represent us as allies talking to other men.
And I think that
sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. So I'm not here to reframe anybody's masculinity. That's some shit that men definitely need to do on their own. What I'm saying is that and I mean, like in this day and age, Google and like shows like this and these moments, like these men going behind us, like those like 40-year-olds now, but even some of the 30-year-olds going back. You guys can have these conversations or Google it or go on Twitter or do anything. I'm talking about more so our roles as parents as we're going forward and raising this new generation. And then you wind up with these school shooters and these non-ass washers on the fringes of society.
Yes, the two genders, mass shooter and non-ass wiper.
Exactly. The problem is right now they are so like, it's like they're so aligned with this crazy, shitty culture that's just happening, is that they just seem acceptable. Where if we start having these conversations, if we start letting go of binaries, if we start, like raising our children in these egalitarian types of ways without gender norms or anything, like that next generation, the person that doesn't want to wash their ass is totally going to be the fringe guy. He's not going to be the guy that thinks that that's like a cool thing. So that's more, I'm just kind of talking about like through the time span is like, I'm not going to waste my time also talking to 40-something-year-old men either. Like if you're willing to have this conversation, if you want to ask a question, I'm down. I did it with my own husband. I'm not about to go like start being a warrior for men. That figure that shit out. Google is amazing. But going forward is more where I'm saying our energy within our home should change.
Well, and I want to say just a quick interjection, and I'll hand it over to you, Brandon. Like, I agree with you. Absolutely. It is never our responsibility to do that emotional labor for men. I do think, though, we have a responsibility to find it within ourselves to disengage without getting aggressive or violent towards men. And I am one in particular who struggles with this because I do want to punch back at men when they like hurt me. And it's one that I've been really actively unlearning. But I think, even though we are not necessarily going to like save men our own age, we have to at least be able to forgive them because, we have to start figuring out how to like actually build community again. Go ahead, Brandon.
I don't know. I mean, when we talk about that kind of equity, I think that it doesn't, part of it is a conversation, or there needs to be a conversation, but I think conversation starts with demands. And I think it's good when people talk amongst themselves about things they do or don't like. I personally frequently complain about men bad, 100,000 likes, 20,000 retweets. Like, it's just like Twitter is just a constant place of, but however, as like that can be whack, but it's also politically important. Like it's important for people to talk to each other and see what they have in common. And especially because like if something gets 20,000 retweets, even if it's banal, it's something that it's an experience that you are sharing with other people who might not.
Did you say banal?
Yeah. Banal is the correct pronunciation.
Okay. Banal retentive.
Banal.
I didn't know what that was. I thought that was maybe a different word.
Boring, whack. Yeah, whatever. Banal.
So as like a counterpoint though, the men going their own way movement.
What about it?
That's men talking amongst themselves without the input of women.
That's not.
And it's not going super great.
It's not going super great, but like also, all right, here's the hot take that we asked for. Only just started. Let's check in on them in 15 years and see what's going on. That sounds ridiculous now, but like, who knows what's going to develop when people talk amongst each other.
Well, what'll develop is that they're going to be these same guys raising boys. Like, and 15 years from now, we're going to be having these conversations with a 15-year-old or older person.
Well, that's an interesting conversation, because really, when we talk about, like, Rachel, you're an educated person. Gender relations are kind of superstructured.
Yeah.
Like, they're kind of something that follows behind the economy. And that's kind of what, when we started talking about like masculinity as like the things that are needed for you to get through your current situation as a society. Y'all talked about like space and time and being able to develop ideas being important. Well, like, gender relations don't just come from our conversations and our retweets. Like, they also come from the roles in society that we have to play, like, in order to make money and live. So as there is like a period of time where we have maybe more economic freedom and we have more economic empowerment and we have more free time as a species, then I think guys will just naturally, in time, if you're hanging out with each other and you're talking more and you're having more conversations, you will develop that kind of camaraderie. You will develop those kind of relationships. You will like develop that kind of thinking that is maybe a more equitable thinking. And one doesn't, like, it can't just come from like the right Twitter discourse or the right hashtag. It just comes from the actual social situation of your life and how you relate to other people. So you can have all of the great political theory that you want, and you can have like, you can go into academia and create something that is internally consistent. But if you present it to a guy that's not having good relations with the opposite sex, they're going to ignore it. Like, regardless of what you like, if they're having really disastrous relationships with the opposite sex, they're going to take whatever you give them. Like, I went to Wellesley and I have this document on gender studies. They're going to be like, get out of here. What's getting me? Like, and there's going to be like the creepy doctor of getting laid that will be like, come here, my son. I love you, even if these women don't. And
that's what coming into community is for. That's why, like, you don't want men just having these conversations. I feel the same way about race, though, also, is that, like, I get the whole, like, white women need to teach, but there's some things I don't need white women going to try to Google about me either. So, like, there's space for, like, all of those places and conversations. It's not saying that one way is right and some are going to listen to the political discourse. Some are going to listen to the degreed person. Some are going to just get it like Jones and hanging out together, smoking a blunt and having a barbecue. But all of it takes some level of community and actually being willing to discuss something. Like, I'm not going to be like, well, I'm not going to talk to her because she's white. I'm not going to talk to him because he's like, this is the binaries are just are well now beyond just saying this is a boy, this is a girl. We have adopted binary thinking to everything. It's right, it's wrong, it's hot, it's cold. There's no more in between, and that is what has to stop. We are literally here and there and polarized in all things, and there's no in between and no connection. And the disconnect is what's killing us.
Yeah, one thing is that, like, we have a very atomized culture where, like, even though we have the internet, right, like, we are as a species, like, especially now during this pandemic, more alone, more like isolated than probably ever in like the last, like, in most of our lifetimes, right? So it's like you can't just go outside and like go to a bar and make a friend or whatever. And then you've also got this idea of like lived experience. Like let's look at like incels or something. Like they like try to ask a girl out like 4 or 5 times and they're unsuccessful, and then they go on the internet and find out like, oh, there's a whole community of like people with my same lived experience, and that kind of leads them down like a rabbit hole. Instead of like just trying again or like trying a different strategy or like maybe going to a different location to do something, they get this reinforced thinking that kind of compounds on their failures.
Because we're all like, there's connection. That's what it is. They found the connection point. Oh, there's other people here like me. You know what I mean? And then
instead of
echo chamber of crazy.
Exactly. And because of this atomization, because it's harder to communicate with people, and we have these kind of like identities, like, oh, you're this and that, and we can't communicate, and this is like, you know, you did that and I did this, and it's like, it's all about lived experience, and we have to kind of like try to cater our arguments and try to bring things back to how people are interacting and how like what interactions they have had, you know, because it's totally possible that like the first 30 times someone tries to talk to someone, whether it be like in any context, it goes unsuccessfully. It's totally possible that like someone doesn't have that many friends and they make friends with someone who isn't that great of a person, but it's the only person that will talk to them, and therefore they kind of like have this like parasitic relationship, you know. There's like a lot of these kind of areas where people are preyed upon, and then there's like, you know, like there's no real avenue because like we're just kind of so atomized. And like it's starting to like, hopefully I hope in the next 5 to 10 years we can have a more approachable society. We can maybe have internets like search engines that, you know, maybe are easier to navigate, so that people, instead of like, oh, I need dating advice, instead of finding incel boards about femoids and how evil they are, they'll find, you know, like, I don't know, like you can just ask a woman dating tips and then they'll help you out, you know, I don't know, like something like that.
For the current, and I will weigh in on this, for the current day, get into self-help, women. Like these guys, there's a market here that's not being hit. But anyway, there's a handful of women that are doing that. They're making tons of money. But just to put that to the side, we are, and I'm glad that you kind of like touched on this. We're entering an era where self-help can be a lot better than it is now. The thing that we really sell when we talk about self-help and community is like personal attention from a guru or from a teacher or somebody that's like set up the sales apparatus for all of those kind of things. And those are really, Rachel, are you signaling yourself, or are you signaling?
Yeah. So, you know, just as like a good time to drop the reminder that if you are a man who cannot fuck and you would like advice on how to get laid, you can in fact pay me by the hour to talk to you about these things and talk to you about gender and explain to you why you're not getting laid. I will tell you, you might not like the answers. They will not be mean. They will not be hostile. I will genuinely try to help you figure out why you're getting laid, but I can't promise you will like the answers, because a lot of it's going to be work on your shit.
People like that. They like to suffer. Like if they're not suffering, it's not legit.
Yeah, they make these struggles in their minds to like make themselves feel like, oh, I'm a hard man. I went through 12 rejections in a row.
But,
you know?
No, but I mean, also, like, it's kind of funny. I had a stage in my life where like I was doing that. But it was like also like sales. I was kind of doing both at the same time. So I kind of was able to look at both.
There's nothing worse. There's nothing. This is free advice for folks who would like to, you know, perhaps pay me to teach them how to fuck later. If you treat hitting on somebody like a sales pitch, like you're at a kiosk in a mall and you're trying to sell dick to them, it doesn't work. It's creepy and it's invasive. Never do that.
I feel bad. Now
A cock kiosk at the mall is not something anybody wants. You feel me?
Finally, we can get to the takes that I will get canceled for.
Okay.
Nobody likes a mall kiosk, but they do sell merchandise. It's just patient time, refining your pitch. It's just like any kind of sales message. The problem is most people like don't want to do that because it sucks to be told no like 20 times. Just like in sales, like it sucks to be told no a million times. But like, actually, I kind of disagree with Rachel. In order to get good at anything, one of the things you need to do is practice with people. So think about the number of conversations that you have with strangers. If you're Rachel, strangers approach you and talk to you all the time. If you're not Rachel, you probably need to be the one that talks to strangers. And obviously there's a middle path of like doing things where you have a pretext to speak to them, which is it's better to like go to a church or something and practice speaking to people. But,
right. Well, and that's the difference that I'm describing here, right? It's not a matter of like, you know, talk to as many people as you reasonably can. Like, yeah, of course, talk to people, get out there, try to make as many friends as possible, but treat it as like you're trying to make friends. Don't make it a transaction. Don't make it like, I'm going to give you 6 attentions for one, put my dick inside you. That's not how this works.
And that's literally how rape culture happens, is because this is like advice. And this is why men shouldn't be talking to men alone. It's like, because it's a sales pitch. And it's like, trust me, we know we want to fuck you ASAP. We are just praying for you not to fuck it up. And y'all will fuck it up with a really bad sales pitch, or when you make it feel transactional. Like, even if we think it's bullshit.
Now, to be fair,
bullshit. I
To be fair, I am cool with it being transactional if you're literally paying me.
Rachel,
if you're literally paying me, that's
I'm
negotiable. We can
seconding
discuss
this.
that.
Selling is bad, but buying, on the other hand,
Rachel, when you start a podcast and you ask for guests, is it or is it not a numbers game?
Women,
I mean, like, am I trying to talk to people that have more clout?
But that's what it is. That's what it comes down to. It shouldn't be a game, like, because this is still a human being.
It's not a commodity.
Nothing should be a game or a commodity. But yes, when we talk to people, like, yes, a certain number of people will say no to whatever our approach is. And we
that's
know that
not seeking a genuine connection. Even if your genuine connection
well,
is
okay. Here's what I can accept.
I don't know what is
genuine. I'll bring these two, I think, together in a way that I think you might both be happy with. Okay, it is, yes, it is about talking to as many people as you can, but that is because finding people you truly, truly vibe with is hard to do. And finding people that really, really meet you where you are can be hard to do. So meeting lots of people brings you closer to that goal. But if the goal is not to form that meaningful connection with somebody, it becomes unethical very quickly.
It's definitely unethical to start conversations.
I'm not even worried about that unethical thing. I'm more concerned with the entitlement that usually comes from it when you're talking with men.
Yeah.
It's not even, I don't even give a fuck. Like, half the time I know they're lying. If they're cute enough and I like their lie, they can get some ass. That's not.
I've been there, yeah.
Yeah, like that's.
I was actually talking about this earlier today.
Yeah,
the one time I fucked a groupie.
Or you won, sir. My problem is the entitlement that comes after. I talked to 12 bitches. I should be able to get some pussy. That's a problem.
Yes.
That's where it becomes, now you're teetering into rape culture and we're talking about dangerous territory. Now, if you could talk to 20 people and never get no attention or whatever and still be cool because you're just trying to, like, hey, if it works, it works. It's fine, it's fine. It is the, damn, I talked to 20. One of somebody's going to give me some. And that's usually what happens with sales. I've sold my whole life. So, because, like, you're like, I'm not leaving until I close a deal.
That's true.
It's violent.
That's actually a very good point. You should definitely not approach your interactions with any human being the way I've seen boiler rooms focus on their sales. I am not leaving here without a yes.
Yeah, like, fuck this. I'm gonna call somebody. Somebody's gonna give me a sale today.
That was when I was canvassing on the Bernie Sanders campaign. I just got so frustrated. I just, like, someone tries to slam the door. I put my foot in. It's like, no, you will vote for Bernie Sanders.
Take a breath. Be a little zen, y'all. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we, of course, could talk about rape culture forever. We probably will eventually talk about rape culture because I think that's another important sex, gender, and sexuality topic. But for today, we are at about an hour, and we are about ready to say goodbye.
Are y'all going to do a post show?
We can.
I don't know. It's up to y'all.
We'll figure that out after the cameras are off. If we come back, there'll be a post show, and we'll post it on Patreon, which is a good way to bring it around to our Patreon. www.patreon.com/notsafe if you would like to become a patron. Any amount will get you access to our post-game show. But
nice.
The more you give, the more you get. So, and the get in this case is access to, like, our Discord server, our attention. Tell us ideas that you have and we'll pretend to like them. If you pay us enough money, we'll literally start a commune and put a bunch of, like, cameras in it, Big Brother style, and just let you watch us 24/7.
The real world style.
It's up to y'all.
Down with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, do become a patron because it's a good thing to do. Also, if you would like to hit me up about giving you, like, how to date a woman lessons, like, seriously, that was not a joke. I will do that. Reach out to me. If you noticed that I have particularly excellent hair today, it is because I got my hair cut at Curltopia, which is a place over in Smyrna. It's great. It is family owned. It is Black owned. And also, look at my curls. They're so good. It's so fabulous. They look delicious and wonderful. And I do recommend them. There's pictures of me on Instagram, which that's not usually the case. So go find them at Curltopia on Instagram.
Nice.
Andrea, Brandon, Desireé.
Wait, before we leave, Sentai Truther Club. Do you like the Power Rangers? That show is happening. I think they just published.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to @Sentai Truther, they're reviewing the season.
On Twitter,
finale.
that is.
So what?
@Sentai Truther on Twitter.
Yes.
Right? Like, you have to make sure you know the platform, right?
I guess. And they're talking about the season finale of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Okay.
So if you're tired of talking about gender, there's only one gender in the Morphin world.
And it's Morphin time.
Morphin. Yeah.
Good. All right. So the two genders are morphed and unmorphed. We did it.
Well, there we go. That works too.
Yeah. And to be clear, they're both trans.
God bless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very nice.